He's most recently the author of Indoctrination U, The Left's War Against Academic Freedom.
David Horowitz, who was Betty Van Patter?
Betty Van Patter worked for me at Ramparts. I was in the late 60s and early 70s, the editor with Peter Collier of the largest magazine of the left, Ramparts. And I got engaged in helping the Black Panther Party and raised a lot of money to buy a church in East Oakland, which was turned into a school. I called it the Oakland Community Learning Center. And Betty Van Patter was my bookkeeper at Ramparts, and I hired her, I recruited her to do the books for this school. And eventually she was doing the economy, as it were, of the party, the Black Panther Party. In December 1974, Betty Van Patter disappeared. And by the time the police fished her body out of San Francisco Bay 5 weeks later, I had figured out that the Panthers had murdered her. And that was really the end of my career in the left, the murder of Betty Van Patter, the way in which the progressive movement defended the Panthers and covered up their crimes and supported them. The fact that I had to live in fear for many years because the Panthers were, not only were they operative then, but the people, some of the people involved in the murder of Betty Van Patter, or whom I have concluded were involved in the murder, tour American campuses today and get big speaking fees and continue their attacks on America.
By that time, how long had you been working with the Panthers?
I had been involved for a year or two. I was introduced to Huey Newton by a Hollywood producer. And I try to help their community projects is basically what I did.
From your memoir, Radical Son, about that period, you wrote this: "Having Huey's ear made me feel politically powerful in a new way. I had no illusion about the Panthers' role as a revolutionary vanguard. I had become involved with them out of a sense of the exhaustion of the movement and with the idea of doing something of immediate benefit for people in the community. I was tired of pouring energy into grand abstractions like the revolution and longed to see my efforts lead to practical results. However, for the political intellectual like myself, there was a seductive aspect to a partnership with Newton, even in so modest an enterprise that was also grandiose."
Exactly. I mean, the left is, as I also say in this autobiography I wrote, intoxicated with its own virtue. Only the left cares about poor people, only the left cares about black people, only the left is concerned about wars and wants to end them, and pays very little attention to the actual impact of its programs on people. It doesn't weigh the positives versus the negatives. It doesn't see concrete reality. And I watched in the 60s, I was part of the 60s, the movement gin itself up for revolution. And of course the Weather Underground blew up bathrooms in the Pentagon and the Capitol, which exhausted itself. I mean, the movement actually died around 1969, 1970 because they had escalated their attacks and their posturing to a point where there was nothing more to do unless you were prepared to take up, AK-47s in American cities. And actually, Tom Hayden and others advocated that, but they didn't have any followers. So I said I wanted to do something concrete. Here was a school. Here they had a lot of kids. The Panther Party, maybe there were 100 children, and I wanted to raise money for this and create a school. But looking back, after I realized that the Panthers were murderers. I mean, they were gangsters. They bullwhipped their own members. It was a terrible organization. I had to ask myself after Betty was murdered, if I wanted to do something for real people, why did I go to the Black Panther Party? I could have gone to a local black church and done the same thing. And I came to the conclusion that I did it because the Panthers were going to make a revolution, because of all the grandiose fantasies that drive people on like me, who have, consider themselves progressives and leftists. And so I got myself involved with murderers, is what happened. And one of the things about this book, Radical Son, I mean, I say in the preface that the people who I really wrote it for, which are young, idealistic progressives like myself, will never read it. And the prediction is proved pretty much true. And that's because the left, which is very, very powerful in the media world, and of course in the universities, has so distorted who I am and what I have to say that these younger generations, particularly if they're in the left, I'm tainted in the way that Whittaker Chambers was. I can remember, one of the things actually I describe in this book is when I eventually became a conservative, which is many, many years after Betty's murder. What the murder of Betty Van Patter did was to stop me and say, you can't go on recruiting people to this cause without understanding what you've done, who they are, and you have to think about this. And I spent about 10 years in which I did no political work. But one of the revelations, Betty disappeared in December '74. I cast my first vote for a Republican in 1984 for Ronald Reagan.
You said you'd voted for Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, but I voted for Jimmy Carter because people came to I remember election day, they say, the election's going to be really close. I lived in Berkeley, of course. Election's going to be really close, David. You've got to vote, and I'm operated on that thing that one vote counts, even though, of course, it doesn't. So I had no idea who Jimmy Carter was, actually, at that point. Because I spent about, many years in what I would call a clinical depression after Betty's death, and I really wasn't paying attention to politics. But, for the sake of my radical community, which I still was sort of part of, I cast a vote for Jimmy Carter. But it was 1984 that I first voted willfully for a Republican, Ronald Reagan.
You say in your memoir, I'm sorry,
I just want to say the part of this book is the revelation that conservatives weren't the racist, sexist, oppressive devils that the left says. In fact, the conservative community is much richer in its diversity of opinions than the left was. Anyway,